Thank you everybody for participating. I'm hoping that it becomes more interactive than me talking, because quite frankly, in these workshops, I think we can all learn from each other quite a bit. So before I get going, just so I have an understanding, how many people here, if you can, I don't know if there's a way to raise your hand or something, are in the kind of 0 to 3 million ARR phase? Okay, so early. How many 3 to 10? Got a few, and then more than 10? Okay, so this is going to, for the people who are in the 10 plus, this might be a little bit, hopefully there's still things you can pick up. For those in the very early stage, this is awesome that you're doing this now, because I was reading an article the other day and it was from a fitness trainer, and how he was talking about how his clients were all expecting all these whizzy, amazing exercises and to constantly be excited. So Stephen, when you said this might be mundane, yeah, it should be. And this is sort of the basics of a good fitness routine is, you know what, push-ups are kind of boring, and so are squats, but they're pretty critical in order to build the muscle to be able to build upon that and do other things. So what we're going to talk about here is building a sales process. Does anybody here know why a sales process is so critical, that feels brave and wants to share?
Because you need something consistent to be able to track, monitor, measure, and then improve.
Bingo, perfect. Because board meetings aren't super fun when you're constantly projecting something, and then in your next board meeting, you were off. And look, you're never going to hit it right in the middle, like dead on every time. But in order to show predictability, and in order for you to be able to really understand what's happening, you need a framework, right? And I always say sales is a mix of art and science. If you think about it, this is the science part of things, is you can't repeat things if you don't know what's happening and what great and what good and what terrible looks like. So does anybody here have a typical sale right now? Anyone? How many right now are still primarily founder-led, and you're still kind of figuring founder-led sales where you're doing the bulk of the sales? Okay, this is great. What I would ask you, please start documenting everything, because the next stage is hiring sales reps. And how do you replicate yourself? How do you go from being the best salesperson to essentially being the best sales engineer, where you're supporting the team, where you don't have to be involved in every single deal of at every single stage? That can't happen if you don't start documenting everything. What questions are asked? What objections come up? Who's involved in the meeting? What do you do? So what I thought we would do, and what I've started doing, is we can go through and talk about a sales process. I'm not going to say this is your sales process, but hopefully throughout in the course of the next 50 minutes, you'll understand the framework to then go out and build something that's right for you. This will not be right for everybody. This is primarily what I'm building here, is primarily, full disclosure, more of a sales led. If you're PLG, some of the fundamentals will still be there, but if it's primarily PLG, you might have some different pieces involved, okay? But if this is for more of sales reps, what I want to do is show you the framework and the questions you need to ask yourself to start documenting. Later on, kind of phase 2, once you've done the squats, you've done the sit-ups, you have that. We'll start adding plyometrics, and we'll start adding more fun exercises on top of this. Like, what kind of questions do you ask to be able to coach the sales reps and to be able to interrogate the sales reps at each stage to get a deep understanding? But you can't do that. You can't genuinely understand what's happening until you lay the basics. How many times, just out of curiosity before we go here, for those of you who do have sales reps, have you had your reps send out an email saying 10% off if you can sign before the end of the month, and gotten silence? Nobody? Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of smiles, so I'm going to take that as a yes. It happens all the time. Do you want to know why that is? Because there's a sales process and the only person merrily going down the process is you. And you're negotiating with yourself because your buyer isn't there yet. So that's why we're going to start defining things. So let me share my screen. Okay, so let's, again, ignore some of the names of the stages. They may not be relevant to you specifically. This right now is for me to talk you through how to build a sales process. And then, I'm happy to share this framework. And then you go through and you refine it for what's relevant to you. Now, hopefully I'm not going to be doing all the talking, so I'm going to ask you to participate, but I've prepared some things just in case. So let's just start with the basics. Meeting booked, right? It's gone from being a lead. You're working really hard. They've agreed, yes, I am going to give you time. It might be half an hour. It might be 15 minutes. I've agreed to give you time. Here are the things that you're going to be starting to look at. Okay. Stage 0. You haven't really spoken to them. You're just doing research. One of the things you're going to start looking at is what % is it likely to close? The answer is probably not much. So I've got this filled in as we go, but who wants to start talking about what do you think the buyer is doing right now before the meeting's even booked? Have you thought about what the buyer is doing?
I guess, would it depend on like how aware they are of the problem they have? i.e., are they in like problem exploration space or like solution exploration space?
Good point. Sometimes they don't even know they have a problem. You've just piqued their curiosity. What should you be doing at this stage? The meeting is booked. What should you be doing before you even walk into that meeting or log on to that meeting?
Do your research, definitely. Know everything about the customer you're trying to speak to, his company, the person who is going to attend, and then you listen to what he has to say.
How many of you, be honest, actually do the research before? Really do the research on the customer? I know. A lot of times.
It depends how you got the lead. Maybe
okay.
You've received, maybe it was outbound lead. So in that case, maybe you targeted the specific country, the specific customer. In that case, definitely you know about him. But if it's an inbound, then still everyone checks. I mean, if you get a lead, the first thing you do is check who is it. Is it a company? Is it an individual? Is it a legitimate lead? Is it a spam? What is it?
What else should you? Yep, no, that's true. But a lot of times what I see is poor preparation for going into a meeting. You might look the person up on LinkedIn. You might look at, the company. But how often do you genuinely prepare lists of good questions you should be asking? How often do you prepare, understanding what is the competitive situation? Who do they compete with, right? What you really need to understand who that customer is, especially in this day and age. They've agreed to give you time. You need to make sure that you are really prepared, because we'll get to the next stage. The next stage is about them, right? And if you're asking them the basics that you could have learned from doing some basic research, you've wasted both of your time. Some other things, but Virginia, you're right. I mean, it's depending on where the lead comes in, it's different. I want you all to start thinking about from this, okay, what information is critical to know in meeting booked? Maybe it's just, maybe there's, again, early stage, we'll talk about it. But I want you to start really documenting who should be involved from their team. What do we want them to learn? Meeting booked is just, they learn that you have empathy, right? You understand that there's a problem and maybe you can solve it. Or you maybe not even a problem, you understand what their day-to-day is like, right? And that's the key to booking a meeting, is not really pitching who you are. It's showing that you understand there's a problem and that you can solve it. Okay. one thing most companies don't think about is who else in the company needs to know the details of that stage, right? How often do you book a meeting and you don't let marketing know necessarily that that lead has converted, or that potentially you can start changing how you market and target to them. So what I've done is I've gone through and filled in. The buyer is acknowledging there is a problem to be solved. It doesn't mean that you're the right answer. It doesn't mean that they're actually going to do anything different. They might determine there's something else. But these are the kind of things that I'd like you to start thinking through. Okay. Has anybody done this? Does anybody want to talk about a process of what you do? Or maybe we can wait until we get into the next stage where it's a little bit deeper, right? This is, the meeting is booked. And this is why it's so important to think through this and to start putting the framework together, because as you add sales reps, being able to systematize this, there is so much information and data that you can learn, and especially feedback to product, right? For product to understand, probably more in the later stages, but we'll go there. We'll get there. So
just one question, actually. I'm George, by the way. Regarding the research, like especially in early stage, you often, I mean, we all have 1,000 things to do, and we also have quite a lot of discovery calls each week, and it's just also a matter of timing. I think, I mean, I would also often like to be much better prepared and go deep into our leads, but often it's just a matter of how much time you can spend on it and want to spend on it. And it's also like, question to you, would you rather then maybe make a few less calls and try to postpone some other ones later, or yeah, and rather have like 5 very, very good calls a week, or how would you manage that?
you tell me. Which would you rather have 5 very good calls or 10 calls?
Yeah, probably 5 very good calls. No.
I mean, look, everything is I'm not gonna give you, there's not one answer for everybody. What I'm saying is people right now, especially in the age of where it's all on Zoom and people are back-to-back calls, you want them to know that you've done their research, because you can get to the meat of things much better and not spend the time asking questions that, quite frankly, you should know. And I'll turn that back on you. How many of you have been the subject of calls where there's a sales rep who's asking you questions that, quite frankly, a little bit of Googling would have solved? Anybody? How does that make you feel?
Just makes me laugh. You know, you get something and it's so poorly thought through. They haven't even, I mean, we get them as Notion Capital. We get people trying to set pictures constantly that we're Notion, the collaboration company, to sell products to us. It's hopeless.
Yeah, look, I can't tell you, I can't emphasize enough, prepare, especially now, especially as budgets are tightening up, especially as people's time is more and more valuable. If you don't encourage your sales reps and set a culture of researching beforehand, you're going to be wasting time. So the next stage, typically, again, I'm going to keep emphasizing typically. Usually the next stage is discovery, right? Still pipeline. There's when I forecast, I tend to look at there's pipeline, which means, yep, it's there. Then there's best case, meaning it should come in. And then there's commit, which means you're telling me it's coming in. And that's not when the contracts are already like clean. You know, you need to start getting your sales reps to start thinking and putting some professional commitment. But let's talk about what is the purpose of discovery? Who should be doing most of the talking?
Person on the other side of the call.
How many of you spend discovery demoing and pitching and talking about your product? Be honest. How many first meetings are you mostly demoing? How do you know what to demo? So this is a step, and being candid, the discovery and kind of the next stage often blend together, sometimes in the first meeting. Once upon a time, it was advised, don't even talk about yourself at all in the first meeting. That's changed a little bit, right? There's an expectation that you have to show a little bit more. You have to give to get, right? You have to prove that you're worth them opening up to. But the bane of my existence is, for example, when my more junior reps open up meetings and they get nervous and then they start demoing. And then it's just basically a feature dump that has absolutely nothing to do with what the client's problem is. And they also waste an opportunity. Because once they've demoed on that first meeting, it's very hard often to get more people involved for the following if that one person isn't excited. So oftentimes you can just show a little bit and say, who else should be involved? Let me prepare a demo. Who else should be involved to see this? Which gives you an excuse to get another meeting, but also get to the right people in the room. It also lets you demo to their problems as opposed to giving a feature dump. Because we all get really excited about our product because we spend all day thinking about our product. You want to know who cares about your features? Nobody. The client doesn't care about the features. They care about the problem it solves. We've all been guilty of this. We've all been guilty of showing cool features and the client's like, that's nice. So let's think about this. What's the one thing that we're showing that we must make sure that they walk away understanding in a discovery?
That we have the answer to his questions.
That what?
I mean, that we have the answer to his pain point. First, we listen to identify the pain point, and then we will show exactly that, just that.
Okay. So one of the things is, why do anything? Has anybody heard about the concept of the 3 whys? Okay, there are 3 questions that if you can't answer them, your customers won't be able to answer them. And quite frankly, good luck getting a signed contract. Why do anything? Why your company? And why now? Right? If you can't answer all 3, it's really hard for your customer to be able to do this. I actually go so far as to put together documents for prospects. How many times has a deal dragged on forever because there's no compelling event? Because you haven't been able to get them to actually sign. They really want to do it. It's just the why now is not there. If you can't answer that and you can't help your customers help you answer that, you're not, a deal will drag on. And it's one of those deals that every quarter it's going to close, it's going to close. And it keeps, those are the ones that have the, 500 and something days in Salesforce. But I want you to really start thinking about, these may not be right for you, these questions. Who's involved from the team? Who should be involved from their team? Think through in each stage, what do we want them to learn? Right? And again, in discovery, it's scratching the surface. You want them to have enough confidence that they're going to go through. What I've done for the exit criteria here is I've overlaid MedPick. There's probably, it might be that you have partners that you want to start getting involved because going to the next stage, they can help you move forward. That's probably for the more advanced, more kind of larger companies. If you're kind of in that early stage, you might not have partners. Okay. Does this all make sense?
Yeah, Jen, there was a question on the chat from, apologize, Kelso or Celso. Is it possible to clarify what tier of sales we're discussing? I.e., is this enterprise, field, inside, SMB? No,
that's a fair question.
Yeah.
The level of detail, this is a must for enterprise sales, but you still want to put some rigor around the SMB, again, partially to start getting a little bit of frameworks. You might not go quite as deep on the inside sales. And I know a lot of inside sales, sometimes you aim for, like a 1 or 2 call close. Absolutely fine. Like I said, you can sometimes condense some of these stages together, but you want to start thinking through, what does a great sale look like? And this is why I'm asking you to start documenting everything now, because when you start overlaying sales reps, they're going to need to know what to do and what good looks like. Will there be deals that are their own work of art and that somehow have a life of their own? Yes, there will be. I'm not that naive, and I've, certainly seen deals that defy every expectation. I've seen, and quite frankly, I hope to see this again. I don't know if I will. I've seen a 7-figure deal close in 2 weeks. That doesn't happen often. I've seen deals that are like 20K take 2 years. But again, if you're not figuring out what's happening and you can't answer those questions, this gives you the framework to have that critical, because it's just as important to qualify deals out that are never going to close as qualify them in. Okay. And again, this is the 80-20 rule. You want to give your team a framework to be able to follow. Okay. So you've had the meeting, discovery. I still consider discoveries, they're still not necessarily a real deal, right? We're still trying to figure out what's going on. Is there anybody here that has in their discovery that has anything that I'm trying to figure out how to make this bigger. Anything that I'm missing? Does anybody do anything different in discovery?
We try and adapt the following process, like to the person and to the business. So if they don't seem to be the type of individuals that are interested in lots of conversation, is kind of get out the way and get the product to them as quickly as we can.
Okay.
But try not to force one process on everybody after that discovery phase, because it will be different.
Okay. I can appreciate that. And there are, again, in this day and age, the days of spending an entire time just talking about the customer, they want to know what's there. But this, again, like I said, this can be condensed. There's just some basics, but I appreciate that there are exceptions. So again, typically, again, ignore the name, but you might go into some kind of a business validation, right? This might be, and I've combined a couple different potential names here. These might be split into multiple stages. I've certainly seen that. And to be honest, I tend to split business and technical separately. For purposes of time, I'm trying to condense. Talk to me about what happens here. When you're validating the business case, when you're doing the demo, talk to me about what typically happens in that meeting or meetings. This is usually more than one meeting. Who do you normally see get involved? Typically, I'll see business users. I'm really happy if I can start seeing some of the technical teams involved. What I don't want to see is it constantly being one person. Again, okay, I'm generalizing here, but if you're constantly speaking to just one person, it's probably not just one person who's going to be making the decision, right? How many people here have had deals where you thought it was all one person and at the very end, somebody else flew in and complicated things that you didn't even know about? Nobody?
Ariel put on the chat, so just.
Oh, sorry. You know what? I'm struggling because I can't see the chat, and.
But I thought I'd bring. So she basically had like the budget holder, the user, possibly the IT teams, maybe legal, procurement, etc. You need to be thinking about all of these things at this kind of stage.
And that is part of the reason. We'll go to the bottom. One of the reasons that I'm so pedantic about MedPick is it reminds me what questions I need to ask. And maybe I'll do a separate session on MedPick one day. But in discovery, you're just figuring out what's the pain, what metrics are they going to judge you by, and who might be a champion. They're not really a champion until you've tested them. Has anybody ever had somebody who you thought was a champion and the minute that things got tough, they immediately folded? Oh, I can't do that. Right? You got to test. We've all been there. That's coaches tell, champions act. So you always want to test that person who you think is a champion to see if they will do things. Or if they're just really good at talking, and then the minute you ask them to do something, it's like, oh, I can't do that. They're a coach. That's okay, but they're a coach. So one of the things, again, when we start talking about MedPick is I want to know who the economic buyer is. I want to know who's actually paying for this. Is this important to them? What's the decision process? How does a company actually make a decision? I literally ask that. And I'm not going to turn this into a MedPick discussion. I'm going to kind of keep this brief. But half the time, who you're talking to has absolutely no idea how the company makes that decision. You can start figuring out by your conversations who the competition is based on what questions they're asking you. And you can ask them too. But what do we think in business validation, or kind of once the discovery is done, does this seem sort of fair for what the buyer is doing? How many people here actually think about what the buyer is doing in each stage?
Presumably they're going to be doing some referencing in the background as well. Or do you think that would be a later stage?
You know what, to be honest, in this day and age, quite frankly, they're probably looking on G2.
Yeah.
They're asking their peers. That's a good point. You're not the only source of information they're going to. That's a really good point. There's lots of back channeling.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that's interesting about this kind of approach, of course, is to tell the question from earlier is it enterprise or SMB, or is it self-serve, sales-led or product-led? The thought process is very similar, no matter what the stage and whatever the motion.
Yeah, and again, for the smaller, do you need to go way into depth on some of the smaller deals? Probably not. At this stage, you should be probably mapping out the org chart. Partially, this is also for ongoing. Let's say they sign the deal. You want to know who else is involved, so you know where the expansion might be able to come from. Potentially different use cases, potentially different users of the product, more usage if you're a usage-based type of company. Okay. The two questions, when we talked about the 3 whys here, before it was why do anything, right? If they can't figure out why to bother doing anything, like, you're nice, but now it's why us and why now. This is where you're starting to lay those seeds, where not only do they know it's worth solving a problem, but that it's worth spending money on solving the problem. Constantine, I see you have a question.
Just, can you double click on why do anything? Like, in terms of, I know it sounds like maybe an obvious question, but is it that you're trying to validate that they actually have a problem or like, yeah, how can you ask that question in a number of different ways to really understand what's going on?
So sorry, this is more from your good point. I'm not phrasing this right. This is more from their point of view. Why should we do anything? You know, if you are selling, let's say you're selling, what does your company do?
We're a data analytics company.
Okay, why do anything? You know, right now we can't figure out, you know, our data's a mess. We don't have insight into our business. We're missing sales opportunity. Like, what would be a reason for companies to even talk to you?
Well, yeah, they're leaving opportunities on the table because sort of like data is siloed away into different teams.
Okay, and what's the impact of that if the data is siloed?
You end up just building a more inefficient, slow business.
Okay, they're probably leaving money on the table. They're spending money on unnecessarily. Their teams are probably frustrated, right? There's probably lots of reasons. That's the why do anything. Once we get to stage 2, business validation, why are you the best solution to solve that? Right?
So I guess just reiterate, it's kind of like we've identified a repeatable pain, can I validate that the customer recognizes that problem and appreciates the impact and the value? I guess that's the essence of it, isn't it?
Yeah. Why are you better than using, Google Sheets? Or there's tons of data analytics solutions out there that are not solving all of the problems in the most elegant, efficient, effective way. Right. And that's where I literally have my teams for the bigger deals. It's just one page, 3 columns. Why do anything? Why us? And then why now? But it's to hand to your champion, because internally there are discussions and there are people probably championing other ways of doing it, including doing nothing or including what they already have. But if you can arm your teams, and again, this is part of the reason that you say, okay, in this stage, you want to arm your teams before you even get to negotiation. Because once you're negotiating, if then you're educating them, it's a much harder, you're starting in a hole. If you already have people who are so passionate about your business, procurement's job is to secure the best deal for their company. It's not really to pick the vendor, right? It's to secure the best deal. And if you have armed your champions really well before you even get to negotiation, it makes that negotiation so much nicer, because you're negotiating from a position of strength. And it's not like, it doesn't become about price. Price will always be a part of it. I get that. That's part of procurement's job. But there's more to negotiate on than price. Does that make sense? Any other questions on that? What else can I answer? If you take nothing away from this, first of all, have a process, and second of all, 3 whys. If you can't answer those 3 questions, assume your customers can't, and assume they're not, like, you might get to a deal, but it'll drag out, and right. I want you to also to think about what happens, what best practice should we be doing? Demo, putting together a mutual business case. It's amazing how many people don't work on business cases with clients. They just give them one. Has anybody here ever had a sales pitch where they told you, and we're going to increase your sales by 20%, and therefore like everything is laid out? Has anybody had those? How many of you actually believe that? Has anybody ever believed when somebody's like, we're going to increase your sales 20%, and therefore we anticipate you're going to make $20 million, right? Okay, that'd be a little bit more, but nobody believes it. But if somebody sat down with you and said, okay, let's, once they're a little bit bought in, I don't want to be so presumptuous as to give you this data. Let's work this out together. To be honest, they've kind of done the calculations beforehand in their head, so they know what kind of numbers they're looking at. But how much more believable would it be if somebody said, tell me, what do you think, like, based on what you've heard, if we, can you see how this would increase your sales anywhere from 10 to, based on, past case studies? Usually it's 20%. Let's just say 10 or 12. Let's be conservative. Does that seem fair? When you say, yeah, that seems fair, you're buying into it. When you co-create the business case, it's much harder for you to then reject. Okay, so this is where you start building the business case. Again, you want to do this before you even start negotiating, because it's really hard to do once you start negotiating, because then you're negotiating on price, which is not a super fun negotiation. Okay, I want you to start thinking in each stage what you need to learn in order to really confidently move to the next stage. Has anybody here ever gotten to all the way down the funnel and you realize you're missing a huge piece of information that would have been really helpful to know? Does anybody want to share? We've all made mistakes. Trust me, I can sit here and do 3 hours on mistakes Jennifer has made in the sales process across her career.
Sorry, Philip. We have this quite a bit. I have actually a question, because we get a lot of inbound requests, and then we handle them, and it was like, and you assume that the why now question is answered because they're coming to you and they said, I have this problem, can you help me? And then we have a somewhat technical solution, so you need to build it into your software. So we went down huge sort of demoing sample data mapping. We did pre-work for them, another meeting. They had 5 people on the call, only to end the call to say, well, it's not going to be on the roadmap until Q4. And I'm like, so, you know, it's another 6 months from now. So we could have actually spent our time much better. So it's one of the learnings. So it was like, oh, we got to move the whole discussion first. And we also had like some people where we had the decision makers in the room, but they thought they could make decision, and then it turns out they can't. So we had like business buyers in the room, and they realized I need to get like IT resources in place, and IT had no resources. So now we don't talk to them anymore. But yeah, stuff like that.
So when they said, let me ask you this, when they said, oh, we can't do this right now, it's on the roadmap for 6 months. Why do you think that was?
To be honest, yeah, that's a good question. I was a bit shocked because we went through all this exercise back and forth. They did work, we did work, and then it was like, oh, it's not going to happen until November. So it's kind of weird. I haven't asked them. I should ask them. Yeah.
So some of the things, again, part of it is building up that business. Part of the why now is building up the business case, where if you can show that for every month, there's a couple ways, you know, there might be a natural why now. One is if you build up a strong enough business case and you can show that there's, I'm making something up, 15,000 euros or pounds of impact per month, you can wait, but that's going to cost you the equivalent of 75,000. Is that okay? The other fun thing is, you know, when do you need to be live? We need to work backwards into implementation. And there's, you know, time for how long is it going to take to implement? How long is it going to take to bed in? There's the old nugget of we need to get you into the implementation schedule, which most companies, it really isn't a problem to slot them in, but everybody freaks out about getting an implementation slot. But if they're saying, oh, we're kicking the tires, it's not as urgent a problem for them to solve. So part of having this process is knowing what to ask when, so you can either start increasing the urgency, or if it's really not that urgent, you can then figure out and align your resources, right? And that's part of decision process and decision criteria of who's involved when you're saying, you know, decision makers. I always ask the question, you know, who's formally involved in this and who's informally involved? Because there's always somebody informally involved, okay? Right about now, you probably also want to let your product teams and maybe your CS teams know that you're having these conversations so they can start planning. And product can start seeing, you know, what's resonating. Any questions on this? We're past discovery. Now this is a real deal. This is where you're committing resources, right? And Philip, thank you for sharing that. That was really, that's nothing that not every single one of us has dealt with. Has anybody else been there where you get super excited about a customer and then they just drag it out? Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. And it's not easy. We've all been there. And it's
or they go silent. Worst case, they go silent. even if you validated the timeline, you asked the right question during the discovery process, and they told you the exact timeline when they need to implement. You start trial, you know, everything, and at some point they just stop communicating.
Yep. And it's really rude and it happens. So how do you sometimes use the sales process to help mitigate that?
You need to follow up with every single person who was in contact with you and during the discovery process. That's why it's important to have multiple contacts in the company, because if your champion I don't know, switches jobs or something, you're in danger of losing that deal.
Yep. It's also, this is why when we talk about being multi-threaded, it's not just having multiple contacts in the company, it's internally as well. It's about orchestrating. You don't need to bring the whole cavalry to every meeting, but there are so many times when I've had deals that I thought were lost or they weren't communicating, but my solutions engineer was communicating, you know, they could get to the tech person and have a separate conversation and find out what was going on. That's part of the reason you want to start thinking about is who should be involved from their teams, but also who should be involved from our teams as well. and look, it will always happen. There will always be cases where, and we always take it personally, not realizing that as much as we like to think that we are the center of their universe, they have other stuff to do as well. But oftentimes when you can start thinking about how you can orchestrate a deal and have other touch points, it makes it so it's not just you calling, there's somebody else who oftentimes has a different relationship. Okay.
I found quite a useful kind of mental model for that is almost like a 3x3 matrix where my top row is the C-suite, and then you might have the director and then the manager or the user, and then you can map people to people. Yeah. So who's going to manage the relationship with these 2 or 3 C-suite people? Who's going to manage the relationship with the technical people? And it's a very simple kind of way to visualize that kind of problem.
Mm-hmm.
Just a question on that, actually. So we do find out quite often who will be who's, for example, the decision maker, and we are talking to some head of department, but we know, for example, the CFO at the end will be the decision maker. Do you have a smart way of actually getting them on the table, bringing them to the table? Because I mean, you can't, of course, force them to just bring the CFO into the meeting. And yeah, that would be actually quite nice to know how a smart way on getting them involved.
What a great way to test your champion, huh? Maybe they don't have to come to the whole meeting, but hey, Mr. Champion, hey, Ms. Champion, I just want to make sure, look, I know you're investing a lot of time. If you can help me, I would love to just have 15 minutes with the CFO to make sure that this is really a priority for them, because there's nothing the CFO wants less than their team spending time on something that, quite frankly, they're never going to sign off on. And that's a whole separate conversation, but it's respectful that I want to make sure that that it's a problem and that they understand the solutions, and that you're not going to get to the economic buyer, and that would be the economic buyer in that case. You might not get to physically speak with the economic buyer in every case. Depends on the size of the deal. If it's a smaller deal, they're not going to. But it's a really good way for you to test your champion, is to say, hey, can I just get 15 minutes with this person? I just want to validate so they, make sure that this is a priority for them. Okay.
Peer-to-peer can work quite well in that kind of instance as well, doesn't it? Where so I really, you've got a great CFO who you've got a great relationship with another customer. Perhaps I could introduce you to your CFO to this CFO, or to my CFO if you have one internally as well. Just disconnects it from yourself, and doesn't feel quite so as if you're selling. You're kind of helping and supporting.
Yep, good point. So what I'm not doing is I'm not going through, because I'm assuming you can read faster than I can talk, and quite frankly, there's nothing worse than somebody reading bullet points to you. So I'm assuming you're reading this as we're going. I'm happy to send out a copy of this framework for you to then adapt. But my biggest pet peeve is sitting there staring at a screen when somebody's reading bullet points to me, because I've already done it. But what you want them to learn at this point, after business validation, they're bought in, right? Now it comes down to the negotiation. Negotiation. Can I just please ask that you make sure that you're both negotiating? Please. Don't put something in negotiation until you know that they're also negotiating, that they're not still trying to figure out, is this right for us? Is this tactical? Because that's where you get those end of quarter, if you sign by the end of the month, we'll give you 10% off. Good luck getting that 10% off, because quite frankly, if they're not ready, they're not going to sign. And has anybody ever then gone back up? Like, no, they know that you can reduce the price. Good luck, forget it. You've just lowered your price. The only person, you're just negotiating with yourself. Okay. So, oops, I should probably have put let me do this. Sorry, let me freeze this. You freeze. Okay. Sorry, I thought I had everything all planned. So negotiation. What is the buyer doing? They're figuring out the various options to create the best value. That does not mean the best price always. It's the best value. And what they're doing is there's different things, there's different levers, and that's a whole separate conversation of, is it term? Is it support? Is it price? There's lots of different levers. And I can't emphasize enough, they're negotiating to get the best value for them. And as long as you can turn that switch, and this is why everything else beforehand is so critical, because you are negotiating from a place of strength. If they genuinely understand what makes you different, they've bought into the business case that you can have an impact on their business. They understand not just that you're solving a problem, but you're solving a problem that actually is more urgent than they realized. And it's become more urgent than they've realized, because as part of this, and again, one of the next pieces to this is overlaying the types of questions that you ask that makes the client or the prospect realize things that they hadn't even realized. So they're actually answering and they're selling themselves. Has anybody ever been in a situation where you've asked a question and all of a sudden you can see the light bulb go on for the client? And you knew the answer, but it's quite frankly, I don't want to say insulting, but nobody wants to be sold to, right? Nobody walks in like, yay, a meeting, somebody's going to sell to me. They want to learn something. And so when you ask, this is part of why research is so important beforehand. When you ask questions and you've planned through this, you ask questions that you know as they answer, it's going to be like that aha moment. And sometimes you can see that light bulb go on. They're selling themselves. Okay. So once they've gotten there, you're negotiating from a position of strength because they've realized the pain is more urgent than they realized. They realize, quite frankly, they can look like a hero by solving this. This is all about the prospect, right? What are you doing? I hate the word close plan because nobody wants to be closed. Like we all say it, but hey, dude, will you help me work on a close plan? I always call it a MAP, mutual action plan, because then it feels a little bit more collaborative. And it's, hey, if you want to be live by this date, let's work backwards. Okay, we need to get the security review done by this date. They might not even know there's a security review. Hint, most of them don't know. I would say in 60% of your deals, the client will have absolutely no idea what needs to happen themselves. Always ask them, have they ever worked on a deal? Do they know what has to happen? Can they find out? Because there's always paperwork that comes in at the end. Validate the process. Who has to sign? Do they know they need to sign? Has anybody here closed a deal after noon or after 1 o'clock on December 31st? Yep. Did anybody close a surprise deal at the end after 1 o'clock on December 31st? Nope, because people are pretty much checked out by then. But you can absolutely close deals after 1 o'clock on December 31st. If everybody who needs to sign knows they need to sign. And if they don't know they need to sign, quite frankly, they're probably not looking at their phone. Or they might be, but they're not looking for the DocuSign. Okay.
I have a question here, Jennifer. Shouldn't you have already validated their sales process? I mean, how they usually buy during the discovery call? Usually that's one of the questions I asked. I mean, how do you usually handle this? How the typical buying process looks like for your company? This is something I need to know from the early stage to be ready for it.
Yep.
And I find it too hard to get this information at this stage. I mean, I've lost time.
Well, you're still in negotiation and you're confirming the paper process, because how many times are there often internal signatures, right? I know who signs, but actually there's 6 people internally who need to sign as well before it even gets to that last person.
Okay, so
this might just be one.
Okay.
But if you don't, this is why you confirm, right? Can I just confirm? And you're dead right. can I just confirm, is it one person who signs or are there internal signatures? Oh, good point. I don't know. It might be there's just one. But if you don't ask, you don't know. And there have been so many deals that have died or slipped because there's two people that need to sign that actually they planned a trip to Bali 3 months ago, right? Like nobody plans a trip to Bali spur of the moment. Maybe they do, but if you know that's going to happen, are they going to be available to sign? No. Is there anybody who can sign for, this is why you ask way in advance. You're right. You need to know this in advance. Okay. What do we need to?
We've got about 5 minutes left.
Perfect. Basically, we want them to feel that they've negotiated a fair deal, right? Finance probably needs to know about this. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit quicker. Make sure that prospect understands some of the trade-offs. They might say, no, I don't want to pay for this. I don't want to pay for enhanced implementation. Okay, I understand that. Here's the value that you might be trading off. Make sure they understand the trade-offs. And then just going to, I might rush through some of this a little bit. Negotiation, the sale is agreed. So in this case, they've agreed the sale, right? The deal can still die, and I still see deals die. We've negotiated, we've got a great price. Again, that's when you have to start. It's still precarious. They've said yes, they haven't signed, right? You need what the buyer is doing. They're probably negotiating like the legal terms, warranties, and the boring stuff that lawyers love, which is why, yay, there are lawyers. And business people kind of zone out on some of this stuff. But what are we doing? We're, again, to your point, we're negotiating, we're making sure all the other paper processes are complete. Security reviews are the bane of probably everybody's existence. Has anybody here had a deal slip because at the last minute there's a security review? Yup, we all have, and if you haven't, you will. If you don't ask about that beforehand, what should we learn? What do we want them to learn? Okay. And then closed one is closed one. Like we all kind of know that. And closed one, there's still things that you want to start planning and who's involved, but I'm just conscious of time. So my point, kind of to sum everything up, if you don't plan for what happens in each stage, and Virginia, thank you for bringing that up, because if you don't ask and you don't tell your sales reps and you don't train your sales reps to ask early on certain things, then you're going to be having that uncomfortable situation of going into a board meeting and saying, yeah, this deal slipped. It shouldn't have slipped. We could have done it, had we asked the right questions and done the right things, it wouldn't have.
Or
So
you just didn't know it would close later. I mean, it may be that it was never possible, but
Yeah.
You're in control.
Fair point. But again, look, is this like, you're not hiring robots. Are they going to do everything exactly 100%? No. But this is so you can start having repeatable. So when you are looking at your sales funnel and when your teams are telling you a deal is in negotiation, you actually know what should be happening in that stage and who should be involved. And is it really a negotiation? Or is it just we're negotiating because I've sent them pricing, which is not really a negotiation?
Not sure if Costa was saying goodbye or wanted to ask a question.
Just one last question, if you don't mind, Jennifer. I guess you mentioned sort of like how this is like enterprise sales, but there's some nuances of this that you can bring into product-led growth. Mm-hmm. Where do you see product-led growth? Like, how do these two worlds combine most effectively from your experience and what you've seen?
Sure. You still want to start thinking through in each stage of what the customer or the prospect user is doing in product-led growth. What should they be doing? What are some of the triggers that gets them to the next stage before we can actually convert them and consider them a paying client? So it might not be that you are as actively involved, you're not having phone calls, but there's still things of who might be involved, right? Okay, at this point, if we see that they're stuck at a certain stage, this is where sales assist comes in and nudges them. This is what we want them to learn, these aha moments at each stage. If they haven't had this aha moment, they're probably not going to move to that next stage. So it's, like I said, this is more designed for a sales led, but you can still think about it, these questions of who should be involved, what do we want them to learn? What do we maybe need to learn? You know, are they sharing this? Are they stuck on certain points? So you can still think it through.
We've got a session we'll cover quite a bit of this next Thursday with Harrison, one of our other go-to-market experts. And we're going to be looking at the fundamental, you know, how do you make decisions around product-led versus sales-led? Where do you start? How do you start? How do you build that process? You know, our philosophy is that wherever you start, you're going to end up ultimately doing both. You know, but it's the philosophical approach, I think, here, which is really, really powerful to think about how and why people buy and how and why you sell.
Yeah. Well,
Jen, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Do you want to hold on a second, Jen? Oh, she's gone. Yeah.